Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our raglan sweater for beginners. If you guys missed the first part, it is linked in the description box below, and I recommend starting with that video first before you start this one. In this video, we're starting at the end of the yoke, separating for sleeves, and then working to the body of the sweater. Finally, we'll finish off the lower hem, and we're starting right now. All right, so here we are. We've reached the end of our yoke, which is the top part of the chest of the sweater. So I have knit the correct length that I wanted this section to be based on what I measured my daughter. That's how you're going to do it for yourself. I'll show you the measurement here. Now going forward, what we're going to do is now we're going to be transferring our stitches off of this main needle to separate for the sleeves. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to keep one section. So from here, from one marker to the next is going to be the chest. Then from the second marker to the third. So basically if we match these up, this is going to be our shoulder and it's going to become the arm of our sweater. And then on the back, same thing. This from here to here is going to become the back of the sweater. It doesn't really matter at this point which is front and back. So it could be the front, it could be the back. It doesn't really matter. And then from the last marker back to the end is going to be the second sleeve. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in either a couple of other needles that are going to hold your stitches. I have a couple of shorter round needles here, which I will transfer my stitches over to. Or you can thread them over to a piece of yarn and then tie it so that you don't lose it. And then you can just cut it, pick it up onto a needle and then go ahead and start knitting again. That works if you only have the one needle that you need for the set. I have lots of needles, so I'm going to use needles. And I found that leaving one on doesn't really make a difference. You just have extra needles. So what we're going to do here is we are going to transfer the first set of stitches over. So now at this point, we're not going to add any more increases into our row. We're going to cast on a few extra stitches into the armpit a little bit later, but for now, we are just going to move our stitches off the needle. And then when we start actually knitting the row, we will add some stitches in, okay? So let's begin to separate our stitches by knitting our row onto one of our small needles from the first stitch marker, marking the end of the row, to the next one. And then we will stop. If you're transferring your needles just to yarn, use a darning needle and thread it through each stitch before looping it off your needle. When you get to the next marker, I like to take my darning needle out and tie both ends of my yarn together so I make sure that I'm never going to lose a stitch while I'm knitting the body. In a little bit, this is what it will be looking like. Okay, so now we left one stitch on the needle to keep our stitch marker. Now take your original needle, bring it around and begin knitting the front section onto that original needle. You're going to have a space between the back and the front. That's fine. We're going to add some stitches to match it up on the next row. So knit across from the second to the third stitch marker, and then we'll transfer over our second sleeve. Our second sleeve is going to work exactly the same as the first. We're going to knit across from the third marker to the final one, slipping our stitches over to the second small needle, and then we'll finish knitting that last part of the row with our original needle as well. For each section, I kept my stitch markers on the body sections. All right, and then here at the other end, we're going to stop one stitch before our stitch marker, like we did on the other sleeve. Now I'm going to pull my stitches, right? Make sure it's in the middle. We're going to do the same thing on this side. There's my there's my two needles. And then I've got this big loop here. And now we're going to finish knitting the row back to our blue stitch marker over here with my original long pink needle. Okay, so we're going to put this inside out of the way. And we're going to knit the rest of the row. Now on the next row, we're going to go around and add some stitches for our armpits, and then we're going to knit all the way along. But this is where you're going to consider some shaping, right? So if you have someone who's really thin or someone who's larger chested, you're going to want to have lots of stitches in the center, and then you're going to want to decrease along the sides. Okay, so depending on how much you need to decrease. So consider this: if you measure the bust of the person or the chest across the largest part, you are going to use that as your first number. And then you want to also use the waist measurement. If you want it to be tighter around the waist, you're going to decide how many stitches you're going to need to decrease on your row, and the length you need to decrease it over. This is getting a little bit more complicated, but if you say need to decrease 10 stitches and you need to do it over 4 inches, you're going to say decrease 2 stitches every inch on each row. Okay, so when you get to along the sides, you can place a stitch marker along the edge of your, from the armpit down to the side of the sweater, and then you'll know where exactly you need to do your decreases. So just count your number of rows, figure out where they need to be, and put in your decreases. But in our case, we're not going to do that. I'm going to leave my sweater straight along the sides. Okay, so it'll make it a little bit more oversized. This one is going to fit my daughter, so she's 9. She's still pretty straight as far as shape goes along her sides. And then when we get to the bottom, we'll add a little bit of a flare out at the bottom of the fabric. Okay, so here's the end of our row. Finished off our stitches. Okay, so now we actually need to go ahead and start adding some stitches to our right needle. So we need to add anywhere between, I would say, 8 stitches and like 15. If it's a false, like an adult, I would do a little bit more, 15, 16, 17 stitches. If it's more of a child or even a baby, you could even go down to like 5 stitches. We're going to do about 10 for my daughter. I already made one sweater for my other daughter, and 10 was about the right number for us. So we can start by just adding our stitches like so. Give your stitch or your yarn a twist. So the yarn is over top right now. And then when we put it onto our needle, then it will be stuck. This is the one that works best for me. And then we're going to knit across the back again. Now here's my small needle. Don't get confused, okay? We're leaving the small needle alone, and we're going to keep working on our large needle at the stitch marker. Okay, now the stitch marker is going to indicate the beginning and the end of the under the arm area.
This will help you need to do any increases or decreases, and you can tell where the under the arm area starts and ends to keep things even.
So just keep that in mind, and we're going to keep working our knitting across this row. When we get to the other side, we'll add 12 more stitches, or the number that you need for your size sweater that you're making. Now that we're kind of past this area, what I usually do is I'll tuck them on the inside so they're more out of the way. All right, and now that I have all of my stitches onto my needles, so now we're going to go ahead and start knitting all the way around, round and round and round,
until you get close to your desired length, depending on the thickness of the hem that you want to add.
I like a separation front and back on my previous few sweaters that I have done. So we're going to do that again on this one. My kids really like having matching sweaters. They're going to have matching sweaters but different colors this time as well. They're so funny. And so once we get down towards the bottom of the body, we will separate, and I will definitely show you how to do that section. And then we'll come back and we'll work on the sleeves. Now, this is a very simple pattern, and when we get to the sleeve, the most complicated part of the whole sweater is going to be picking up the stitches under the arm that match with these ones that we just cast on. I like it because it means I don't have to do a ton of purl stitching, and I can measure everything as I go, and I can decide how big I want everything to be. So we're just going to keep knitting for several more rows. I will show you some progress photos here in the video as I work my way along. And then the next section of video will be how to finish the bottom of the sweater. All right, you can give the video pause here, knit away, and come back when you're ready to work on the next section.
All right, so here we are down to the finished body of our sweater. We're going to separate the bottom section, the front from the back, and make the back a little bit longer. So on my last row of the body, I added a stitch marker at the complete opposite point underneath the arm from the other side. There is also a white stitch marker there on the right hand side at the bottom. You can see that. We're going to move that one in a second. And the blue one there is still marking the end of our row, but we don't actually need that one anymore. Keep in mind that if you want to just do a simple rolled edge, you can just knit your sweater as long as you'd like and cast off, and it will roll up nicely because we're knitting in stockinette. You can also do something like our neckline where you're doing a simple knit and purl pattern and just do that all the way around and then cast off when you reach your desired length. That will give you a flatter sitting lower hemline. We are going to separate the front from the back and do one side a little bit longer. So for this first row, I'm going to do all purl stitches all the way over to this next marker, the other white one, and then we're going to stop, turn around, and go back across that front. Don't worry about the back side. We will knit that once we have finished and cast off the front section. Now I'm going to move my stitch marker one stitch further onto the back section so it doesn't fall off, and then we're going to work our way back across the front. Now for this section, I am choosing to do the same stitch pattern as we had done for the neckline. So it is a knit 1, purl 2 pattern to finish off this lower hemline. So we start with a slip stitch, and then we knit, and then purl 2. So knit 1, purl 2 all the way across this section, and then I'll double check at the end if we have to modify our stitches to make our stitch pattern actually work out. All right, and here we are coming up to the end of the row. I am about to realize that in order for my stitch pattern to work out in the way that I want, I am short one stitch. Now, ideally at the end of my row, I want a knit stitch followed by a purl at the end of the row. Now, I am knitting my last stitch on the row there, so I need to go back and add one more. And so I'm just going to pick up a quick little lifted increase, one stitch before the end, to make sure that I have it looking the way that I want. And you guys might have seen there, I was just double checking that I had all the stitches correct. Sometimes when I'm counting, I miss one, and so I have to go back. But this time I was okay. And so now we just need to add one more stitch. And we always want to finish our row with a purl because we slipped the first stitch on the row, and that will give us a nice flat edge. And let's go ahead and work our wrong side row. So we're going to turn our work around and start with a slip stitch with our yarn in the front. First stitch will be a purl, and then 2 knits as the exact opposite of what we had done on the right side row, the outside row. Go ahead and work these 2 rows to finish off the front section of our hem, and you can cast off your work when you're finished. Just the front section though, because we'll be back in just a moment to work the back. All right, and here we go with the end of our front lower section. I knit about 1.5 inches or so in that knit 1, purl 2, or knit 2, purl 1, depending on which side we were working on. And then I cast off using the stretchy cast off from the previous video. I'll link that in the description box below. And now we're going to start and do the exact same thing that we did with the front side for the back side, except we're going to work probably more like 2.5, 3 inches down before we do our cast off row. So let's start again. Because we cast off, we're going to pick up our yarn at the beginning. Slip the first stitch. We can take our stitch markers off at this point as well. And then we'll knit all the way across this first row of the back. The next row starts with our slip stitch again, and then starts with a purl 1 followed by knit 2, purl 1, knit 2 across the row. Make an adjustment if you don't have enough stitches or you have too many. You can always knit or purl 2 together at the end of the row if necessary, and then finish your row 2 purls at the end of the row. Then finally, our right side row in pattern will be slip stitch, knit 1, purl 2, repeating those 3 across the row, finishing your row with a knit and a purl. Continue until you get to your desired length, and you can go ahead and cast off. And that's it for the body of our sweater. We're going to move on next time in the next video with picking up stitches under the arms, knitting the arms, and finishing off the sleeves. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.